wake of thousands of deaths, men, women and children, the United Nations General Assembly has voted overwhelmingly in favour of a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. New Zealand was one of 153 countries to vote yes, 23 countries abstained and 10, including Israel and the US, voted no. Former Prime Minister of New Zealand and former UN official Helen Clark joins us for more on this morning. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
This is a non-binding vote, so how influential do you think it will actually be?
Clearly it didn't stop the bombing overnight. The General Assembly's spoken extremely loudly. There's very little support for voting down that resolution, but nonetheless the killing went on. The question is, I think now, the extent to which the United States will try to put brakes on Israel. It's been uttering the words, but really hasn't done enough to convince Israel that it has to stop this and start to look for a way forward that doesn't involve cycles of war in Gaza.
The US was saying that the world is losing patience in indiscriminate bombing. Do you think this is a sign of a fraying relationship?
I think behind the scenes there's probably a lot more tension than we're seeing publicly. That statement of Joe Biden's was pretty telling, that the US knows that it's losing friends as long as it's standing by a country which is killing and displacing people to the extent that Israel is in Gaza. Look, we all know there's a package here. There must be a ceasefire. The hostages have to be released. And then you have to take advantage of the ceasefire to try to extend it to get a political process in place that would lead to the two-state solution, which is still the only internationally supported solution on the table. Now, clearly it's a tortuous path to get there, but that's where we need to get. So a ceasefire that's protracted with hostages released, these are critical first steps.
What do you think it would take for the US to vote in favour of a ceasefire?
I'm not sure that it would, but what it could do, as it did recently in the Security Council, is not apply a veto, because the Security Council resolutions are binding on member states. So a member state that acts in flagrant contravention of a Security Council resolution is in deep trouble. Look, the UN has been a bit of a bystander on the political process in the Middle East for a long time. It of course, has done a good job in rallying the humanitarian and other kinds of support, but on peace and security, it's been missing in action. But somehow this dispute has to have international actors now coming into play, because left to the two sides, they're not going to reach an agreement which will lead to a two-state solution. So the UN may have some role to play.
What do you think about the language that was used in the joint statement from New Zealand, Australian, Canadian leaders yesterday, where they were calling for steps towards a ceasefire? Do you think that was significant?
Well, two things about this. Firstly, Australia and Canada have moved their position. They abstained on the resolution in the General Assembly on the 27th of October. New Zealand voted in favour of it then, so our position has been consistent. I think the US would be particularly concerned about losing the support of Canada and Australia. Second, I think the statement was a little bit of a setback from the New Zealand position. It used language that New Zealand hasn't used before. Take, for example, this phrase, quote, defeating Hamas. Now, Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, questioned this a week or two back, and he said, what does this mean? Because those who go deeper into the situation know that Hamas, of course, has a military wing which committed terrorist acts on the 7th of October and at other times. But it has also been a social and political movement. And I have to say, the world is full of examples from South Africa to East Timor to Kenya to wherever, where those previously designated, quote, terrorists have ended up in governments or leading them. So this kind of phraseology, I think, has not been consistent with where New Zealand's been at.
Although, yeah, the statement said that there is no role for Hamas in future governance of Gaza.
So
what did
if
you
you'd
make of
said,
that?
if you'd said that about the African National Congress while Mandela was on his 30 years in jail on Robben Island, where would we be today? So as I say, all of these movements have a spectrum. Hamas has terrorists in its spectrum. It has also been a social and political movement, rather like the Muslim Brotherhood in other countries in the region. Now, the Palestinian Authority Prime Minister said recently that he could foresee a solution where Hamas was a junior partner in a coalition of the Palestinian liberation movement. So I think these absolutist statements aren't actually that helpful. We all want to see an end to terrorism and what it does to families' lives, hopes, and dreams. But if we make absolutist statements which apply to all the spectrum of a particular movement, I think we're in some trouble.
Could that backfire on New Zealand in future, potentially?
Well, I see New Zealand's foreign policy, shuffling and in a direction that I find concerning. And this would be one aspect of it. Look, we've been consistent in deploring terrorism, but we've also been consistent in wanting sustainable peace. And what I learned over many years of public life, both in New Zealand and then at the UN, is that sometimes peace comes with trade-offs. Do you pursue justice to the extent that you can't get peace? I'll give you an example. UNDP was on the ground facilitating reconciliation in Rwanda after the genocide. Most people who perpetrated the genocide were never put in a prison because it would have been a significant part of the population. So the ringleaders were gone after. They served time in jail and so on. But sometimes for a society to move ahead, you have to bury some hatchets, and it's not easy, but you can't go after every single perpetrator of a significant wrong.
Former Prime Minister of New Zealand and former UNDP Administrator Helen Clark, we really appreciate your time. Thank you for being with us.